All right, guys, this is a special episode of Six Packs and Racks, and we're excited to have you on board. We have a very special guest, Dr. James Kroll, Dr. Deer, and coming out with him as our first guest was a big deal for us, and we're very excited about it. He's a wealth of knowledge, and we're just very thankful that he was able to join us. We did, however, have minor audio issues as he was joining us via his iPhone. So the video audio thing got a little hairy at times, but the amount of information that you will get out of this podcast is going to far outweigh any little bit of issues that we have with listening. So please enjoy the ride, jump in, and stay committed. Well, everybody, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening and watching. We've got a extra special episode for you. So we're going to kind of forego most of our normal segments here on this one. We've got Dr. James Kroll, Dr. Deer, as most of you probably know him. Just an awesome resource to have with us. We're really excited. So we're not going to mess around. We're just going to get started on it. We've got some great questions for him, and he's got some great answers for us. So I'm going to go ahead and start off just giving a little bit of your background. I know you've written for North American Whitetail, and you obviously own Dr. Deer. You hosted on some North American Whitetail TV stuff. You're out of Texas. You're professor emeritus at Stephen F. Austin University. Just a great background. Biology work at Texas A&M in your younger years. And we're just happy to have you. An excellent resource, like I said, to tap into and kind of get some good deer knowledge for a crowd that may be unaware of you or maybe not. We'll see. I think you're very well known, well respected. So hopefully we can help you reach a demographic that maybe hasn't turned on to your resource yet. But if you guys, we're all going to kind of present a question or two, and we'll answer. You can answer. Feel free to answer as we roll along. And when we get sick of answering questions, that's when we'll call her a day. Dylan, you want to go ahead and start us off?
Yeah. I guess trying to think which question we have that I can handle here. But I had just a kind of more general question for you. I know you have a lot of say in a lot of states' regulations and a lot to say about states' regulations. So I guess I'm just curious, if you had to pick right now 2 states, which state is doing it the best as far as deer management, deer regulation, and deer hunting, and which state is doing it the worst as far as those 3 as well?
Well, I'm going to drag my home roots here. Texas is doing it the best mainly because they, this is kind of the birthplace of deer management. Not kind of, it is. And the nature of Texas is that private landowners are very strong in this state. Like Wisconsin, the majority of the land is privately owned, and the state agency is very cooperative with us. They give us a very large framework in managing our deer.
Sure.
And it's really been great. Now, Mississippi is another great state that they're not doing as well as they used to do, but they're the birthplace of deer management assistance programs, or DMAP programs.
Sure.
Back in the day, Harry Jacobson and David Gwynn all of us were young pups then in those days, and they came up with the idea of deer management assistance, and they've done a very good job of it. The worst job is a list. There's I'm not reticent to criticize agencies when they need it, and I try to help them when they need my help. For years, Pennsylvania was without a doubt the worst. But thanks to Gary Alt, he came along in those days. He ran that program around in Pennsylvania, and it's light years ahead of where it used to be. Right now, I'm not real thrilled with the way Michigan is managing its deer.
Okay.
I wouldn't call them the worst, but they're making them and Arkansas are making some pretty bad decisions right now.
Okay.
Not because they want to, it's just the way it is.
Sure. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that information, and just kind of hearing your outlook on it really means a lot.
Now, Scott is a Michigan resident, so why don't you go ahead and bust a question out for us, Scott?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
What is your thoughts on the APRs in Michigan, statewide?
That's probably the number one question other than CWD I get asked nowadays. I'm going to give you a long start back. We were North American Whitetail, and Steve Ball and I were instrumental in the early days of developing APRs, and not that we were the guys that developed it, but we financially supported the research done by Micah Goldstein in Dooley County, Georgia. And that was a remarkable work, and it was very, very successful. And that has grown over the years. It gave rise to the Quality Deer Management Association, part of the reasons. But I have some very strong feelings about APR. First of all, the average deer hunter sees a deer for 3 seconds. Deer, buck, boom. That's just the way it is, And we've had deer to hunt for over 70 years now, plenty of deer to hunt. And guys need to get over the days of just shooting antlers. The state agencies haven't gotten over that. They've practiced what we call traditional deer management. As a matter of fact, I was reading you're from Michigan, I was reading some of their old documents way back there in the 50s, and they essentially saying that their goal was essentially to produce yearling bucks and produce bucks for hunters to shoot. Now, one of the criticisms, there are many criticisms of APR, but one of them is that all it is trophy management. Well, it may be that's one of the side benefits is bigger bucks, but as a biologist, somebody who's been doing this for 50 years, I'm committed to managing for natural deer herds, and natural deer herds are those that have a natural sex ratio and a natural age structure, living in a good habitat. I've meant for the majority of bucks that breed be 4.5, 5.5 years old. And there are states out there where a 4.5 and 5.5-year-old buck exists. So I was very interested in the beginning to support like that we could protect the yearling bucks. Now, there's lots of ways to do it. Some of them I've tacitly supported over the years because it's better than nothing. Point restrictions are the worst, because as our landmark study on antler growth and deer showed, that a yearling buck can be an 8-pointer, or it can be a spotter, So it's real difficult. The predictability of points is not very good. But like in Arkansas, when they did the 6-point rule, I supported it because it was better than nothing. Biologically, we found that spread for most deer in the United States is a pretty good indicator. 15 inches, most of the deer in the United States are very happy to hold their ears at about 15 inches for you. But that creates a problem because the criticism we get all the time is that, well, what about the narrow deer, the exceptionally narrow deer? All you're doing is protecting those, and you're going to make your deer have smaller spreads. Well, in some cases, that's true. And on private hunting clubs or landowners that really ask me what's the best criterion for protecting young bucks, I tell them a 15-inch spread or an 18-inch beam. If you do that, you're going to protect everything, but you'll start harvesting some 3-year-olds, and then you'll get some 4-year-olds in the harvest that way. But the thing that I've learned all along, and we see from day one in Dooley County, is that APRs are only successful when it's a grassroots movement. State agencies dictating it will never work. People don't like state agencies to dictate to them about anything, so they don't work very well. It has to be a highly acceptable thing. It has to be the people have to want it. If they don't want it, I say, well, go for it. If you enjoy the low quality you got, well, then go ahead and wallow in it. But I'm not telling you what you have to kill. those of you that are from Wisconsin, when I was the deer czar there, one of the big rubs was Arnabuck. Well, Arnabuck came from Clinton Lake, Illinois. A friend of mine was the one that came up with that. It's a power plant lake herd, and they had hunting only because of the power plant, and they wanted to have better bucks. So he set a rule: you had to shoot a doe before you could kill a buck. Well, that's private land, right? There's no doubt. Some of the data shows that Arnabuck in Wisconsin worked pretty good.
Yeah,
it just made it mad. Just made everybody mad. And if people are mad and not supporting you, then why have something?
Yeah.
So that's a long answer about APRs. I'm for them if the people want them, but if you're going to have them, make them very simple. You can't. Game laws have become so complex that you have to carry a lawyer around with you. The rules should be very simple, especially young people. They make it so hard for kids to get into hunting nowadays. It's so no wonder we're hunters right and left. So you have to make it simple. That's why I go for a 15-inch spread.
I live in central Wisconsin. I've hunted here, lived here my whole life. And ever since I was really little, we've had some sort of albino or piebald deer population in that area. And it was quite small for many years. And over the last, I would say 3 to 5 years, that population has greatly increased. I feel like it's something that you don't hear a lot about, that the Wisconsin DNR doesn't talk about much as it being a growing issue. But just where I hunt and the area I live in, I'm kind of in the center of it. So I'm seeing it kind of encroach on a lot of other hunting properties where there's a rising population of these piebald deer that can't be harvested. And I know, so my dad owned a local grocery store there, so he got to talk to a lot of local hunters, and they were saying the same thing, that there were so many deer on their properties that they couldn't harvest, things like that. So I just kind of wanted to hear your input on the albino piebald harvest restrictions, if it's a good thing, if it's a bad thing, what is the benefit of having them in the population, and just a little more information for people like that.
Well, that's a great question. I do get asked that, but that's a great question, and I'd be happy to answer it. First of all, let's just go through the different color phases and situations of deer. You've got the piebald, which is essentially looks like a pinto. Okay. Mm-hmm. You've got white deer that have normal colored eyes, which are not albinos. They're white deer. You've got albinos that have pink eyes. And then very rarely, and only I think here in Texas, we have some populations of black. Right? All right, I'll start with black deer and work my way back. Black deer are double recessive. That means that you've got to have a black deer breed black deer to get a black deer. So it's a very rare situation. So you hardly ever see it anywhere. The albino is a recessive trait. So again, you've got to have an albino breed with an albino. The white deer are dominant. You can breed, if you breed a white buck to a white doe, about at least half of their offspring are going to be white. Right? Now the piebald when I see piebald deer, it is a dead giveaway to inbreeding. A lot of times they will have Roman noses. They'll be dwarf. There'll be some dwarfism in them, and they rarely ever have really big antlers. Now, the minute I said that, somebody in Wisconsin is going to have killed the piebald deer with big antlers. But we work on the average and not the exceptions. Okay, so I use piebalds as an indicator that you've got an inbred herd. Right? If you got an inbred herd, that's a management problem. And I don't see any reason on this earth to protect my piebald deer, and I do not. On places that I manage, and I manage it all throughout every state from Mexico to Canada. And if I see piebald deer, I take them out. But it's a sure indication that what you've got is an inbred herd. How do you get an inbred herd? Well, one of those things we go back to the harvesting too many bucks kind of deal. If you got really skewed sex ratios, you can become inbred pretty easily that way. The white deer, they're like, I don't know if y'all are familiar. There was a military reserve in New York that was because it was a military reserve. It was high fence with a cyclone fence, and it had a notable white deer population in it. And they made shooting white deer illegal. And there was no biological reason to support that other than the people in that area liked white deer.
Sure.
So, that's the justification for protecting a color phase of deer is that somebody likes it.
Mm-hmm.
So, if people want to do that, that's fine. If you want to keep white deer out there, it really doesn't hurt the genetics of the herd. Certainly, black deer don't hurt any genetics whatsoever. But pieballs are a dead giveaway that you've got an inbreeding problem.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for answering that, because I've myself, Brennan, and Dylan, we all have wildlife backgrounds, and I remember, when we were going to school, one of the things they talked about was inbreeding as a showing that you're having a bottleneck in your population. So that definitely clears it up. And I know some of the reasons I think we have them in the area. There was a lot of local game farms at one point that had white deer populations in them, and they're believed to have escaped. So maybe that is the driving reason of why we're seeing them a lot more. But I've always felt too that it's something that I feel like the DNR needs to address at some point. Otherwise, it's going to get worse.
And I'll interject too. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Not albinos, then I told you before that white deer is a dominant trait, so they can pretty well take over an area. The white ones can, the albinos can't, and so it's just possible. There, you've got had a couple of breeders in Wisconsin that specialize in pieballs and white deer. And I don't know there's right now at all, but they were specializing in it.
I've seen a little bit of everything in that local population between, true albino deer, piebald, and white deer. So it's a big mix of everything there.
Yeah.
Dylan, you had something?
Yeah, no, I was just gonna kind of back up what you were saying. Is the legend is in the area. It's actually my wife's side of the family. My in-laws had a deer farm, and they were raising a lot of white deer, and some stray dogs got in, ran the deer around. They broke down the fence. A few of the white deer got into the population, and it's just been every year you see more and more of these white deer. So what you were saying about the dominant trait in the white deer, a lot of the ones that we see, at least the ones that I've seen, aren't albino. They're just white deer. So that makes sense what you're saying about the dominant trait actually kind of being more and more prominent every year.
That's very feasible. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
And that's about a 30-mile square area that is covered now in the state of Wisconsin.
It's interesting. You guys, no matter how they got there, they make for some great pictures.
Definitely.
Oh, they're beautiful. I mean, I enjoy seeing them, on a side note, there's been some good DNA studies that have shown, back in the restoration days in the 40s and 50s, they didn't really care where they got their deer. They were just trying to get them back. And so they carried deer from all over. One of the reasons why, like, for example, in Alabama, they've got such a late breeding season is that they brought in some Mexican deer. And they're really notorious for breeding late. But the DNA has shown that they don't really move all that far, that you can still find genetically, you can find those pockets where deer have been released. In Georgia, a lot of Wisconsin deer were brought in one specific area in Georgia, and that's where some of their biggest bucks are coming from. And you know what Wisconsin deer look like, and southern deer are a lot grayer, and they stick out, like a sore thumb out there in the woods. And it created an old wives' tale that a lot of people, the local people around the South, tell me, we have two kinds of deer. We have gray deer and red deer, or they call them Hereford deer. And they say the red deer live in the uplands and the gray deer live in the bottomlands. And they've got a whole lore about them, which is not even true.
I have actually heard that before. Something else a question that I have that we didn't actually present you with, but I think you'll be fine answering it. I'm curious about. It's one of the many things I'm ignorant to, but I've got some friends who are in central southern Florida, and they've got a rut in July. And what's the cause of that?
Yep. As a matter of fact, I manage some birds in central South Florida. About July 15th is their rut. But in their season didn't know. They asked me if I thought rattling would work in November. I said, I don't think so. By then, got fawns on the ground there. When deer rut is a real interesting story. It's all genetic. All these races of whitetails, which are because of the translocation days, they're all screwed up. Which there are places, especially in the South, where we have constant trickle ruts because the genetics is so messed up. But each race of deer is genetically primed to breed at a certain time. And the reason in most cases that they breed when they do relates to when they wean their fawns. When a doe weans a fawn, it's on its own. And so food situation has to be really good. Now, the dry time of the year in Florida, their dry season is different from ours. It's in the winter. So you got a problem there, and you also have a hurricane season. Now in South Texas, the deer breed pretty much around. I'll talk about full moons in a minute, but they breed about on the full moon in December. And the reason that they do is the hurricane season is in August, early September, and that's when they get the majority of their rainfall. And after the rainfall comes, then you have a green up period. And it's perfect conditions for fawns that are being weaned. In the Mississippi Delta, they breed late because you don't want to have fawns on the ground during the spring flooding season. So that's what's selected for them to breed in that late period of time also. Midwestern deer, I've done, I don't know how many thousands of autopsies or necropsies on does in the Midwest, and your deer would like to breed November 15th. Now, because the way the moon works, they will breed somewhere between the last week of October and the third week of November, depending on when the full moon is. Because the full moon is really what primes when deer breed. Not when they're running or anything, but when they actually breed for some very complex reasons. But it's the full moon that primes it. You got the harvest moon in September down in the Gulf Coast of Texas, the Avery Island whitetails, which goes from about New Orleans all the way around Corpus Christi, Texas. They breed in late September, early October. And so they prime on the harvest moon. Okay. The next moon, the moon in October, a lot of the southern deer will be breeding on that moon, but the next one, the beaver moon, is the one that your deer would like to breed on. By the way, the moons the last 2 years have really been screwed up, and this coming year we're going to have another blue moon in October, and you're going to have another one. All of my fetal measurements for the Midwest showed that the deer rutted 10 days late in the Midwest last year.
Interesting. Wow. That's incredible. So that was based off of necropsies that you performed?
Yeah.
Wow.
See, we can take out the fetuses, measure them, and with 95% accuracy, figure out when they were conceived.
That's incredible.
It's very cool. Very cool. So what are the abilities of a doe or does in a small social population to synchronize estrus cycles? Like where I hunt, I'm in East Tennessee, and the specific property that I spend most of my time hunting, it always seems the rut will be like a week and a half to 2 weeks different than my uncle's farm that's 5 miles away. So is that an issue of specific social populations that are synchronizing their estrus cycle, or what are your thoughts on that?
That's probably going back to that stocking period. It'd be interesting to look at the stocking records for where those deer came from in that area. That has a lot to do with it. The other one is what I gave you a while ago, when deer would like to do things. Deer that aren't in good physical condition are not going to do it like that. And we're seeing more and more around the country what we call trickle ruts, where the does that doe is not going to breed until she gets back into good physical condition. The deer have to do things in a specific order. The does, they have to wean their fawns. They have to molt their summer coat, put on their fall coat, and that takes a whole lot of protein to do it, more than almost than growing fawns. And then once they do that, they obligatorily store fat in the fall. They've got to build back their reserves, then they rut. Now, if they have been in bad condition all summer, or even the ones that have nursed two fawns during the summer, they're going to have a tough time getting back into breeding condition in time for the ideal peak rut. So in herds that are overpopulated, what you'll have is a leapfrog effect, where the does that lose their fawns because they were bred at the wrong time or they're poor nutritional condition, they'll get in good condition real fast. They'll come into the fall and breed early. The does that actually had fawns, ironically, are not in good condition and they're going to breed late. So it's kind of a leapfrog, with the doe doing well over each, in alternating years.
Wow.
Doe groups are highly genetically related. They are mothers, daughters, aunts, sisters, and a doe group will never let another doe in that group. And we've studied this for years, and they will not let another group. And that relates to what I've been trying to preach for a long time about CWD management. But and there's an alpha doe that runs she owns that place. And we've got some, because of improper doe harvest, we've got some geriatric does out there. We've got does that are 12, 15 years old. And in Michigan, let's go back to Michigan. Michigan has been a stagnant deer herd forever. And there's some people up there that made their career studying a stagnant deer herd, and they think that the dogma there is that you have to have old does to have successful reproduction. Well, the only reason you do is because the deer herd's in such horrible shape that it takes a doe forever to be able to carry off a fawn. Now, at Turtle Lake, we brought them down to 3.5. And we've got a high percentage of our doe fawns breeding, and they're breeding actually early. All of them are breeding earlier than the average for the state. So we like to have younger deer herds is what we like to have, not those old girls out there.
Sure. That's an interesting take.
So we actually see, when we hunt in North Dakota a lot, we'll see large groups of adult does. A lot of them won't even have fawns with them. You're saying that'd be the reason why?
Right.
Okay.
Right. They're just, they're old and they're overpopulated, and those does are if you see a doe that in the fall that doesn't come up with a fawn, she's an inert ingredient. She has not done her job. If I grew up in cattle business on a ranch, and if we had a cow that couldn't pull off a calf, she got a free ride to town because she wasn't doing anything for us. So, and hunters don't pay attention to those. They're just looking at bucks anyway. But if you start looking at those doe groups and learning them, first of all, they'll make you a better hunter because you can follow them around and you'll find the bucks. But you'll see that you've got, say, 5 does come up and you've got 2 fawns. Well, that's ridiculous. You should have, if 40% or more of your fawns do not live to be 1 year of age, it's mathematically impossible to have mature bucks. But there's this misconception, what I call the old cow man. I've been lectured thousands of times over the years that, you only need 1 bull for 20 cows. Well, we're not raising calves, we're raising bucks, And
sure.
That's nonsense. your bucks are geared to breed. They're not geared to breed very many does. If they breed 3 or 4 a year, they've done a pretty good job.
Wow.
All right, very good. Thank you for that. Brendan, do you have anything for him?
Yeah, Dr. Kroll. So I grew up in Wisconsin, lived here all my life until 6 years ago, and I moved down to Iowa. That's where I live now. But obviously, I still hunt in Wisconsin, hunt with a lot of my buddies in Wisconsin with the filming side of things, and follow the regulations real close and kind of the proposals. And one of them that's kind of got everybody stirred up right now is last year during the traditional 9-day gun season, the harvest numbers were really low. And as the calendar fell late last year, a lot of people are blaming it on a late season. A lot of people blame it on the weather. But either way, one of the proposals now moving forward is there's talks of, and I don't think it'll pass, but there's talks of a 16-day gun season with high power rifles in Wisconsin. What are your thoughts on something like that?
Well, I've been very much aware. I get all the data from Wisconsin, and when the season opens, it's going to determine your buck harvest. You know, it wasn't that your deer buck population was down last year. It was the timing of the season. So, and a good colleague of mine who's on the NRB, Greg Kazmierski, he predicted it. He's 100% successful in predicting what the harvest is going to be every year by when it falls. To get to answer your question, I would be very much opposed to lengthening the rifle season. The colleague of mine, Larry Marshman, a year ago, analyzed all the states that produce big bucks and record book, and he wanted to find out what they had in common. Well, one of them was that all the states that produce large numbers of big bucks have a high agricultural component to their state. Secondly, they have some of the best soils in the world, those large soils that you've got the deer can almost eat the dirt and grow. Another one was they were mostly northern ranges, and the other one was they had a non-existent or very restrictive rifle season. And so I think if you extend that rifle season, or a lot of times they want you to move it up to coincide with the rut, you're going to have a couple of really years, and then you're going to regret that you ever did it. Yeah. Now, I'll bring up something you just mentioned about that will probably tick some people off, but I've been working with these animals all my life, and they've beaten me up pretty bad. I've broken every bone in my body working with them, including my neck 3 times. But so my days of a vertical are long gone. First deer I ever killed, I was like 14, and I killed it with a bow I made myself, and even the arrows I had to make myself. But anyway, on North American whitetail, we hunt with crossbows sometimes, and I never apologize for it. However, the reason I don't, Ohio has some really great data on crossbows, and what it says is crossbows get young people into bow hunting earlier, and some vertical bow guys would say that in bow hunting, and it also allows people to stay in hunting longer, like the 80-year-olds. Okay. All right. On the flip side of that coin, what we're starting to see now is the crossbow that I first used and encountered is far inferior to what they're using today. And it's a very efficient weapon that we're using today. And it's in Wisconsin, apparently it's having an impact on the age structure of your herd. So I think there's going to be a lot of people looking at how they configure the archery season and whether or not it includes the crossbows or not. Which, like I said, some people are going to get really mad saying that, but hey, I don't really care. I'm a biologist and a scientist, and I work with data, and that's the way it is. So, but I've never looked down on anybody for shooting a deer with a crossbow. Like I said, I've been a bow hunter since the early 60s. Okay. And I always hate going and giving talks to bow gatherings of bow hunters, because the first thing they're going to ask you is, what do you hunt with? And you can never answer right. If you say so-called bow, then the wheelbow guys walk away. And if you say wheelbows, the traditional guys walk away. And, God, if you bring up the crossbow, then but the first deer I ever killed on North American whitetail with a crossbow, I only got one death threat, so I thought I did pretty well. So.
What did that first bow that you made? What did you make that out of? What kind of wood?
I made it out of a tree called Bodark, Osage orange.
Oh,
which
yeah.
You can't cut with an. Yeah. And then I had cedar dowel rods, and we used the Bear 3-blade broadheads. We glued them on, and we used white turkey feathers for our fletching. And we painted our arrows white because in those days, I always say, hunting in fairly low light conditions with those bows. You could see where the arrow went. That first bow, I still have it, by the way, and it has a 25-pound pull.
Okay.
And I killed a lot of deer, but I had to get really close, So, but it was exciting to do that. Yeah,
that's very cool. Something I've always wanted to do is make a bow out of. I actually have a really big Osage in my yard, so I'm always looking at that thing with hungry eyes, getting ready to cut it down.
Yeah.
We've got another good question from Scott. What do you got, man?
Yeah. So, as you know, Michigan has banned baiting statewide, and I was wondering what your thoughts were on that, and if you think food plots have the same effect that a mineral site would to spreading CWD.
Well, first of all, I don't think there's very many people that have read and studied everything ever written about CWD scientifically. And also I had to deal with it in coming up with a plan in Wisconsin for so-called management of it. Absolutely. It's intuitive that since probably the only part of the body in a deer that really can have the potential to spread prions is the saliva. So intuitively, you'd think that, well, if you allowed baiting, if you had concentrations of them, the deer would probably be leaving saliva, which would be contaminated with prions. The problem with that is that we spent all these millions of dollars making college professors like me famous in publications and grants and all that sort of stuff, and we still don't know the basic answers about CWD that we need to know. The first and foremost one is, what is the infective dose? How many prions does a deer have to be exposed to come down with the disease? The impression that some of these agencies and some of these university scientists will give you is, I have a lot of experience working with anthrax. Now, anthrax is called bacillus. It's a bacteria. Those bacteria are sitting out there on the vegetation, and a deer doesn't have to get very many, and he's going to come down with anthrax, and 24 hours later, he's going to be dead. Okay? But they act like that there's these prions out there that they're hiding and waiting to pounce on a deer when he walks by. So we don't know what the infective dose. There's not one peer-reviewed study that is documented that baiting has spread CWD. Now, a lot of the CWD fanatics will get red and argue and everything, but I say produce the science. I'm not saying it isn't, but I'm saying I have to go on science, and we don't have that science there. I will say this. On another disease, the place I work with in Michigan there at Turtle Lake, I went and worked there because it was the epicenter of tuberculosis in the United States for whitetails. And I was told by the state agency folks that was an unmanageable area, that you couldn't work with the people. And that was a baiting area like there's no tomorrow. My first experience there was at Rogers City. I went up there to give a talk in February of all times. And a guy put me up in his daughter's bedroom, not with his daughter, but because he had outside her window he had a pile of sugar beets about 8 feet tall with a light on it. And so at 2:00 in the morning, I woke up and looked out the window, and there was this poor doe standing on top of this pile of sugar beets gnawing at a frozen beet. Well, sugar beets in themselves have a problem, but we won't go into that. But, I thought, geez, a whiz. I mean, this isn't deer hunting, and, but what we found out is that anything that spreads deer out, there's a huge difference between baiting and feeding. And I've never seen an agency guy that could get his mind around or her mind around that there is a difference. I see no problem if legal. I see no problem with feeding if it's just part of a comprehensive habitat management program that we first produce high quality habitat and then we use it there. It would really help us, say, in Michigan, if we could legally feed. We don't hunt over bait. It's illegal, but we would hunt over bait when it was legal. But it would really help us out. And what we did at Turtle Lake, when I got there, we had a 12% infection rate of tuberculosis. Well, we've got a timbering program, started managing the timber. We've got a huge food plot program. And we really hammered the does and brought the population down, and we spread the deer out. And the minute we spread the deer out, our infection rate now is less than 1%. So management is the key to all of these things. But the thing about, it's like chronic wasting disease. When chronic wasting disease came on the scene, a lot of agency and university types viewed it as a hammer. It was the hammer they could use to eliminate all the things that they hated about deer hunting, and one of which was baiting. And now there's some of them, they tried for a while to say that planting food plots was going to spread CWD. They did this funky study where they showed that they could harvest some prions out of grass, and so the food plots were going to pick up prions and carry them up and put them in the deer. And the whole study was bogus and it was nonsense anyway. So, that's the thing about baiting. The other side of it, here's the other side. I gave a talk, I was probably 35 years old at the time. I went to Ohio and I gave a talk on deer hunting, on how to hunt deer. And I had a huge audience, and I made this really stupid stuff. I said, I wish you guys would get out of those boxes staring at those bait piles and start really hunting deer. Well, afterwards, this 84 man came up to me and he said, I understand your position, but you need to understand, my knees are shot and I have a bad heart. That's the only way I can hunt. And I felt like I was about that tall. And I never shut my mouth off about that kind of stuff ever again. Is that a lot of times bait increases the doe harvest or increases the deer harvest. And what are we going to do? If we're trying to control these deer populations, and let's face it, the average deer hunter is not the skilled, Daniel Boone that they used to be. He sits behind a desk most of the year and pushes back and goes out and hunts for 3 or 4 days out of the year. And so their skill sets are not very high. So if it eliminates deer hunters, I don't like it. If it decreases the antlerless harvest, I don't like it. So there are times when I just say, well, if it's legal and you want to bait deer, well, you go ahead. But it's like a lot of things. These people with their hard dogmatic opinions, they need to think about, that there are other opinions out there. For example, I gave a talk in South Carolina not too long ago, and a guy came up and he said, well, I don't like the way you Texans hunt deer. I said, well, how do we hunt deer? Well, some of y'all hunt in high racks. And I go, well, some people do hunt in high racks in that thick brush. And I said, well, wait a minute. You hunt them with Walker hounds. Is that okay? And they went, well, yeah. I mean, what's wrong with hunting with dogs? Everybody's got their own opinions.
In the end, we're all hunters. It doesn't matter how we do it, in my opinion.
Yeah.
That is a great opinion to have. And my criteria that I use is something good. Is it good for whitetails, and is it good for whitetail hunting? That's the decision points to make. And if the answer is yes, hey, great. So
I appreciate that. It was great insight. Awesome to have. One other thing I wanted to touch on, and I know you're a fairly opinionated fella in this realm. What are your thoughts on most of the commercially available, specifically hunter-marketed seed blends for food plots? I know that there are a lot of those out there that there aren't very many that don't include some kind of brassica. And I'd like to know how you feel about that.
You want to get me in trouble, don't you? I never knew that that planting food plots was a religious experience, because it must be, because people get so red-faced. And the first time I said something bad about brassicas, I didn't know that my parents were not married. To be honest with you, I could give a hoot what added Bowhunter 362 thinks about anything. Yeah, these blogs, it's a horrible place. I don't even like to go there. But here's let's start from the beginning. We did the very first food plot research ever done. As a matter of fact, we came up with the term food plot. Okay, when we first started, when I started the Institute for Whitetail Deer Management Research at Stephen F. Austin, we called in what today would be called focus groups. We called in hunters and landowners and everybody and said, "What do you need to know?" And one of the first questions they asked was, "Can we plant something for the deer?" Well, we went, "Well, we'll find out." So the first step in developing a 20-year research program at that point, we're now in our third 20-year program, is I went out and I said, I used some logic. I said, who knows more about growing forages for ruminants than anybody? And it was dairymen. So I went and asked dairymen, "What do you grow?" And they said, "Cereal grains and legumes." Pure and simple. So our first research, we looked at various cereal grains, and we looked at legumes, clovers, alfalfa in some places. Alfalfa is a great deer feed, but it's very picky, and you got to be a good farmer to grow it, and you got to have the right soil. But so that was the first things we looked at. There is not one plant that you can bring up and ask me about that we hadn't tested years ago. We've tested them all, and there's only 5 that work. But it's a big business now. And our research, we have what we call beta test sites all over the United States, where we put out what we call salad bars, and we let the deer tell us what they like. Okay. And lo and behold, for the cool season, cereal grains are still the best thing you can grow out there. That's why I worked with LSU, and when that was another interesting thing. When I came up with the thing about brassicas, which I'll get to in a minute, I was told that I was some sort of shield for buck forage oats. Well, they don't pay me. I do. We do independent research. We worked with LSU, Dr. Stephen Harrison, who's one of the few remaining oat breeders in the world. He's one of the best there is. And in 30 years, we have released only 3 varieties of oats. Now, wheat is also a good food plot variety, but if you plant wheat, you cut your yield by 40%. But a lot of times up in Wisconsin, Michigan, those areas, we grow wheat because wheat, even though that variety that we developed with LSU of oats is good down to about 8 degrees, wheat is better than that. So clovers, we looked at all the clovers, and there was one company, I won't mention their name, they upset me pretty bad one time. But the problem with these guys is they're businessmen, and they're looking for a gimmick, the latest thing. And if they find something, the problem with white clover like Ladino was it grows real well in the blackland soils of Alabama. Okay, and the person that was working with the Ladino clovers, he had some good success there, so he didn't grow anywhere. And he had people planting Ladino clovers in South Texas, where they've got like 12 inches of rain a year. It's not going to work at all. So get to the chase here is that those 5 things are cereal grains, which would be wheat and oats. Rye is horrible. If you plant ryegrass, it reflects on your parents. Don't do it. Okay. red and white clover. And there's several varieties of those, red and white clover. And then over the last 15 or 20 years, we've been working with chicory. And chicory is a really good one. It's kind of persnickety, but if you can get it in the ground and get it up, it's going to put down a 2 or 3 foot taproot, and it's really drought hardy, and it's a good one. But there's 126 varieties of them. And if you buy a bag of chicories from in the big box store, you probably got most of the 126 varieties in that bag. And there's some of them deer don't like. If it's got a white or green rib in the middle of the leaf, deer love it. If it's got a pink or purple rib, deer hate it. So, then we've had everything, all the magic beans. We had Lab, we had God, you named it. There's a bunch of them out there, and none of them have panned out. They haven't panned out at all. Just a good, solid program. Summer, warm season in the north, we finally got them planting cool season, but warm season up there, we plant chicory in the fall, and of course it carries on into summer. But we plant a lot of mixed corn and soybeans. In the south, we plant corn and cowpeas. But especially in the south, if you plant cowpeas, you're going to have to put an electric fence around it, or a net with these new net wire fences that poly net fences have been working with, to keep them off of it till you want them in. And we've come up with some rotation grazing systems that work great. We rotate our deer around to different plots, and it's pretty cool stuff, and it's not very expensive to do. But I would never recommend anybody buy a mixture of seed for the following reasons. First of all, if you look at the ingredients, and one of the few laws that you have to obey says that the most abundant has to be listed first and on down. The first two are always the cheapest junk that you can buy. Okay. And it's the majority of the seed in there. The second thing is the seeds are all different sizes, and they have different planting depths that they need. There's no way to correctly plant a mix. The next thing is that mix changes every year. That they just go out and commodity buy, and they're just throwing stuff together and seeing what sticks to the wall. Okay. So if you're going to plant food plots, buy pure seed. Whatever you're going to plant, and I'm not going to promote anybody's product, but if you plant a clover, if you want to plant a white clover, go get a good white clover and plant it right. And that's the best thing to do. Now I'll get to the part people will hate me. Some people will hate me. Brassicas. Okay. Brassicas have got a real problem. First of all, brassica, people think that we have in native plants, we have first, second, third choice native plants. Right? We also have first, second, third choice food plot varieties. We have some varieties that deer, if you give them a choice, are not going to eat unless that's the only thing they have. And I put something out on Facebook. I showed some of our plots. We put out our controls out every year, or various varieties of brassicas, and our deer don't eat them because they got everything else. And the big argument that people came back with me was, well, when times get rough, they're very important because the deer will eat them. Well, what kind of statement is that? Things got to get bad before the deer will eat them? But the most important thing, and believe me, I've got the science, the published science to back it up, is got a lot of toxic alcohol. And when you get, like in Wisconsin, we had lots of reports of losing deer because they cause diarrhea and hemolytic anemia if you eat too much of them. In Europe, they regulate how many acres you can plant because they've been well documented to kill red deer and roe deer, and hares for that matter. So the brassicas, I'm just not a real fan of. But if you're one of these religious brassica fanatics, well, I'm not going to argue with you. Just don't do it. But in a good year, you're going to do fine. In a really bad year, you could kill some deer.
That's interesting. I hadn't actually seen that. I've seen some of your recent Facebook posts with your seclusion cages or your fences around your plots that you've been putting up. It's great information. Why don't we take a second? Where can people find you at on social media to kind of connect and figure out what you've been up to lately?
Well, Facebook is Dr. Deer, and my website is drdeer.com. And we've had that website up for years, and we've got this huge library of publications and video that you can search on there on just about any topic you want to look at. All the stuff we've done over the last 50 years. So we get a lot of people that come to the website. I take my reputation and my role very seriously. Is that I don't say or do anything that I can't back up, even if I don't like it. But so we make a big effort to keep everything factual that we put out there. I have my own personal Facebook page, and those are the places where every once in a while I'll say something politically, but I don't make any statements or political statements or anything else on my Dr. Deer website or Dr. Deer Facebook.
Well, hopefully anyone with a little bit of intelligence can realize the difference between your professional and your personal pages. I mean, that's what a personal page is for, really, And honestly, I was looking through yours a little bit, and your personal Facebook, I love it. I love every second of it. We do have one more question. Yeah, of course. One more question at least from Brennan.
Yeah, Dr. Kroll, down here in Iowa, EHD is always a big topic. And it seems like, I know this year it hit again. I remember the last time I can remember it hitting this hard, I think was in 2012. But it seems to hit certain pockets. Luckily for me, wasn't in the areas where I hunt, but I do a lot of shed hunting all around the state. We found a lot of dead deer this year that we presume were EHD kills. What's your background, and what can you say about EHD as far as why does it hit in certain areas and why does it not hit in certain other areas? Is it a way of Mother Nature thinning out the herd when it needs to be thinned out, or what's your take on that, EHD?
Yeah, I have a lot of experience with EHD and its cousin, blue tongue. We just call them hemorrhagic disease. The Bible says that there's a statement that Saul has killed his thousands, but David has killed his tens of thousands. Well, Saul is CWD and David is EHD. EHD has killed millions, and we can only account for 400 or 500 deer actually dying from CWD. EHD is a complex of viruses that are carried by gnats when deer come around the mud, because that's where the maggots live, is in the mud, like a drying up pond or a drying up stream. And there are several strains of it, just like now we've got the COVID-19 strain of influenza. That one of the things that just really set me off not too long ago was and he's a big guy with the QDMA. He made the statement that CWD was not natural and EHD was natural. Well, first of all, CWD is natural. It's not a manufactured disease. But I beg to differ with him on EHD, because the two strains that have been most responsible for huge mortality in whitetails in the last dozen years are strain 6 and strain 2. One comes from Australia and one comes from Bangladesh. And they have a unique ability to reorganize themselves. And so they're very lethal. And they tend to move in waves across the country. I used to be amused that there was a time when people said, well, we don't have that problem in the north. That's a southern disease. Well, the type locations for EHD is 1957 in New Jersey and Michigan. So it's a northern disease too. I predicted that you were right about 2012. When I was the deer czar in Wisconsin, I asked the director that I said, you guys need to be on the lookout for EHD because you're about to have a problem. And they said, oh no, we don't have EHD as a problem. Well, ironically, that August, he calls me up. He says, well, you were right. And I said, what? We're losing a bunch of deer to EHD. And they said, well, what are we going to do? Because we don't want it to affect license sales. Well, the same way in Michigan. Michigan, we lost so many, in 2012, we lost so many deer in Michigan that you could smell the rotting carcasses at the gate in places. So it is, and then you look at the Milk River Valley in Montana, there's never going to be a mature buck there anymore because about every 4 or 5 years, they just get hammered. They can lose as much as 95% of their herd. And there's not a thing we can do about it. There's no vaccines. There'd be no way to get a vaccine into the herd. It's just going to be something we're going to have to work around over the years. But the thing about it though, unlike CWD, it is a density dependent disease. So if we're managing our deer herd well, we're going to have less infections. One of the things that we discovered, and why I'm so adamant about using artificial water, is that when we use artificial water and get deer trained to it, we don't have any mud. And we actually reduce the loss to EHD by having artificial water out there.
That's awesome.
That was great. Yeah, that's a great take on that.
One thing that always makes me curious about EHD, and personally, I've never experienced it as much of a problem here where I hunt in East Tennessee, but the TVA, I'm right on the Tennessee River, and they drop the river levels every year, but it's always later in the season. But I always wonder, when we have a low precipitation year, how much of an impact that's going to have, because we're going to have more of these mud pools on the riverbanks, and I'm always curious to see if there's anything that would potentially create an issue there. But like I said, I'm not finding dead deer left and right, so it's not been an issue thus far. But I do remember, I'm from Michigan, and a lot of my family still lives up there, and they have sawmills. They're loggers. And I remember in 2012 when that was such an issue, and they were they're out in the woods all the time, and they're like, we're just finding dead deer constantly.
The whole state smelt.
Yeah. And what kills me is that it was a big issue, but nobody was losing their minds over it like they are CWD. And that's something that's taken way fewer lives, like you mentioned.
Yeah, I asked him that. Why are you not upset about EHD? You've lost a heck of a lot more deer to EHD. We've lost not just to EHD, but we've lost about 20% of our deer herd since 2000. As our deer herds are going down, and Dr. Jacobson and I in 1994 predicted that all these things that are happening, that it's basically from mismanagement. And a lot of even states, that have had a real nice honeymoon, like Iowa and Ohio, we're going to start seeing some problems there because, it irritates me to hear people say, well, we've got an infinite amount of food. We've got this agriculture. Well, you do for 5 or 6 months, and then you got clean farming after that. And I've spent a couple of years walking through the wood lots of the Midwest, and there's nothing left for deer to eat in there. Because what those do, it's an expanding and contracting deer herd, is that in the summer they expand and they go to all these agricultural fields, and then in the fall and winter they contract stringers, and the density in those woodlots and stringers is very, very high. And so there's some folks in Ohio that I always say facetiously that they're living life like the wino who drinks his bottle with a sack around it so he can't see the end coming. But the glory days, I've watched in my career. I've watched the new hot spot. It's a new hot spot right now. Western and Oklahoma are the new hot spots. Well, we've run out of hot spots, and we're going to have to do a better job of managing it if we want to have that quality. But along with that 20% decline in deer, we've lost that many or more hunters. Here's the thing that I'm very concerned about, the reaction and the hoopla over chronic wasting. But if I wanted to destroy hunting, 80% of which is deer hunting, I would convince the general public and hunters that venison was an unwholesome food item. And that's what these guys have done. I don't know if they've done it on purpose or what, but they're inadvertently teaming up with the animal rights people. How many of y'all heard that term zombie deer in the last couple of years? You know who came up with the term zombie deer? PETA. and a lot of people picked it up, and a lot of outdoor riders picked it up. And so now I've had, in the last 2 years, I've lost count of the number of hunters that come up to me and say, I'm just not going to hunt anymore because I'm not going to eat that venison. And that's going to destroy this fear out there that's been generated, is going to destroy the thing that we love the most.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, that's a great point. Okay. It's definitely it's strategic. I mean, you can, as an outsider looking in, you can, if you're paying attention, you can see the way that's kind of unfolding, and it's crazy to me how many state wildlife agencies are almost buying into that and jumping on the bandwagon of don't eat your venison. That's something that I've noticed. It's almost hard to believe, But we have one more question for you. Anybody, Mansell, you good? You got anything else you want to ask?
I have one, and I think it might be the question that you were wanting to ask. I don't know. I just wanted to kind of throw a scenario out to you and see what you would put in for a management suggestion for like a state. Say the majority of our listeners are from the Midwest. So if we could just use the Midwest as a model, what would you suggest to be like your ideal state management plan when it comes to season dates, things like that, to promote hunting, a balance of hunting for anyone, whether you want to manage to shoot mature deer or any size deer, but also allow for those deer to get to the maximum age that they can potentially reach and produce a healthy, viable herd.
I would say exactly what we recommended in Wisconsin in our report was, first of all, we have to democratize deer hunting. That drives agency people and my wildlife colleagues crazy because they think that they know what's best for everything, and they don't like politics. Well, they're involved in politics all the time. But we need to, first of all, in most of the places where we hunt whitetails, the private landowner is the majority. And as a matter of fact, 80% of the wildlife lives on 60% of the land in the United States. And that 60% is the privately owned land. So we have to work the private landowner into the equation. Aldo Leopold thought that from day one. I've read everything he wrote, and he thought that the key to the future of wildlife management was a partnership between state agencies and private landowners. So that was the reason why we pushed Wisconsin to start a DMAP program. They've had some false starts and everything, but for the most part, you realize the last 2 seasons in Wisconsin, they have not had one complaint because they've got these CDACs now where they've got county committees. They've got their disagreements and stuff, but first of all, we let them decide, what do you want? First of all, we gave them the option from a population standpoint that you guys you want to decrease. The agency is collecting metrics of deer management and give that information to that committee or the local people, and they'll make the right decision. The problem in Wisconsin has been that they still, after that was 2012. Okay, now 8 years later, they still haven't gotten all the metrics together. They're still trying to base their decision on this Excel spreadsheet model that's got an accuracy of 123% plus or minus. So, but it's starting to work there. Is to let people decide what they want, and then give them good, solid science information to make decisions. I really like the way you think, and I like the questions you've asked. They're well thought out questions.
Thank you.
Well, yeah, we appreciate that. Honestly, we're just honored and glad to have you here. You're an amazing resource. Someone with your experience level, you've been in the game for so long. It's just a rare occasion to get to sit down and have a conversation with somebody that's been as involved as you've been for as long as you've been. So we're very appreciative of that. But we want to make sure everybody understands that they can, again, follow you, drdeer.com, or check you out on Facebook at Dr. Deer, and see any of the works you've been involved with and kind of what you bring to the table. And this has been an extremely informative podcast. Most of us, all of us, are just a group of friends that get together and record these every week just to have fun. And we don't really present a whole lot of useful information like this one will. But I'm hopeful that our listeners will be excited to kind of hear what you have to say. We covered a really wide range of topics that apply to every deer hunter. So I'm just glad to have you, man. Glad to get this one in the books.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We appreciate you hopping on and taking the time to do this. We appreciate it a lot. So
yeah, I've been a big fan of your stuff for a long time, especially your take and just kind of level-headedness on CWD. So thank you so much.
All right, y'all.